The morning of my sister's wedding, Mom's voice cut through the phone. Don't ruin this day. I'm Bridget Coleman, 30, the family's so-called failure. Slipping into an ugly olive green bridesmaid dress, I braced for the pitying looks at the Westin Hotel in Denver. My family thinks I'm stuck in a kitchen scraping by. They don't know I built Coleman's Table, a name that's about to shake things up. At the altar, my sister pointed at me, smirking. That's my little sister? Our family's biggest letdown. The room laughed. My cheeks burned. But then a bridesmaid's question stopped everyone cold, turning their laughter to silence. Want to know what flipped the day upside down? Stick around for the truth they never saw coming. Ever been judged by your own family? Hit subscribe and drop your story in the comments. Let's see who proved them wrong. The night before the wedding, I stepped into the rooftop lounge of the Westin Hotel. The chatter of guests filled the air, their clinking glasses and polite laughter masking the tension I felt. I adjusted my dress, trying to blend in, but the weight of my family's judgment was already pressing down. My Aunt Pamela Reed spotted me first. "Bridget still working in that kitchen?" she asked, her smile sharp. "It's such a temporary job, isn't it?" Her words stung, but I nodded, forcing a tight smile. I wasn't ready to tell her about Coleman's Table, not yet. Mom Nancy Coleman joined us, her eyes scanning my plain black dress. "You could have worn something nicer," she said, then sighed. "Your sister's done so well. She's marrying a lawyer, you know." The comparison to Kristen, my sister, wasn't new, but it still cut deep. I sipped my drink, avoiding her gaze as memories of my own path flickered through my mind. I'd started in a greasy diner kitchen, chopping onions, scrubbing pans, learning every detail of the restaurant business. That's how Coleman's Table was born, not from a fancy degree, but from late nights and calloused hands. By 28, I'd opened my first location, and now at 30, it was a chain, with a $10 million deal on the horizon. But my family, they never asked. Across the room, I caught the eye of Virginia Walsh, the groom's mother. She approached, her pearls gleaming, and offered a pitying smile. "So, Bridget, you're in catering?" she asked, her tone implying it was a step above dishwashing. I mumbled something vague, but her son, Corey Walsh, chimed in. "A kitchen job." "That's quaint," he said, chuckling. The word grated on me, but I stayed silent, my fingers tightening around my glass. They didn't know I'd built a business that could buy and sell Corey's tech startup twice over. I wanted to scream it, but instead I took a breath and excused myself to the bar. As I waited for a refill, I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Pamela. "It's embarrassing," Mom whispered. "Kristen's got her life together, and Bridget's still struggling." Struggling, I'd spent years proving myself, turning down cushy offers to learn the hard way. My first restaurant was a tiny hole-in-the-wall, barely breaking even. I'd worked 16-hour shifts, tweaking recipes, training staff, until it became a local hit. By the second year, I'd opened another, then another. Now Coleman's Table was a name in Denver's dining scene, and I was finalizing a deal to expand nationwide. $10 million signed and sealed, waiting for my next move. But to them, I was just the kitchen girl. Corey approached again, this time with a smirk. "Still driving that old Honda?" he asked, as if my car defined me. I forced a laugh, but inside I was seething. I remembered the day I bought that car, used reliable, paid in cash from my first restaurant's profits. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine, just like Coleman's Table. I didn't need a sports car to prove my worth, but Corey's jab made me want to shove my success in his face. Instead, I turned away, catching a glimpse of my sister across the lounge. She was radiant, surrounded by admirers, her laughter loud and confident. I wondered if she'd ever felt the weight of being less than in this family. The bartender handed me my drink, and I leaned against the counter, replaying the past. After high school, I'd skipped college, unlike Kristen. I wanted to learn by doing, not sitting in a classroom. I took a job at a diner, then a upscale bistro, absorbing every detail: how to balance a menu, manage a team, create an experience. By 25, I'd saved enough to lease a space for my first restaurant. I named it Coleman's Table, a nod to the family I wanted to make proud, but they never came to see it. They never asked about my late nights, my risks, my wins. They saw my apron and assumed I was stuck. A guest bumped into me, snapping me back to the present. Aunt Pamela was still talking to Mom, their heads bent close. "She'll figure it out someday," Pamela said, her voice carrying. Figure it out. I'd built an empire while they were busy judging me. I glanced at Virginia, who was now chatting with other guests, probably spreading the same tired narrative about my simple life. Corey was back with his group, laughing, oblivious to the fire he'd stoked in me. I took a final sip of my drink and set it down. Tomorrow was the wedding, and I'd face more of their pity. But something told me this wasn't the end of the story. By the morning of the ceremony, I was already dreading the day. In a cramped suite at the Westin Hotel, I sat among the bridesmaids, the hum of hair dryers and chatter filling the air. I adjusted my dress, trying to focus on the task at hand, but the weight of last night's comments lingered. A bridesmaid, her eyes curious, leaned over. "So, Bridget, you're still working in a kitchen?" she asked, her tone dripping with pity. I forced a nod, my throat tight. Another chimed in. "That must be tough." Their smiles were kind, but their glances screamed judgment. I wanted to tell them about Coleman's Table, but the words wouldn't come. Then my sister Kristen Doyle swept into the room, her bridal robe pristine, her presence commanding. She caught my eye and smirked. "Oh, Bridget," she said loud enough for everyone to hear, "there's our family's biggest letdown still slaving away in a kitchen." The room burst into laughter, sharp and cutting like glass under my skin. My face burned, but I clenched my fists under the table, forcing a blank expression. Kristen tossed her hair, basking in the attention, while the bridesmaids exchanged amused looks. I wanted to scream that I wasn't a failure, that I'd built something bigger than they could imagine, but I bit my tongue. It was her day, not mine. The laughter faded, but the sting didn't. I stared at my reflection in the vanity mirror, my hands trembling as I touched up my makeup. Kristen's words echoed Mom's from yesterday and Aunt Pamela's from the night before. They all assumed I was stuck scraping by, too ashamed to admit I'd never made it. But they'd never asked about my life. Not once. Mom had called me twice a year, always to remind me of family expectations, never to inquire about my work. Kristen sent texts about her promotions, her engagement, her perfect life, but never asked what I was doing. Even Dad, silent as he was, had stopped asking after I skipped college. They'd written me off as the family disappointment without a second thought. As the bridesmaids fussed over Kristen's veil, I slipped into a corner, my mind racing. I remembered the first time I told Mom I wanted to work in restaurants. A cook, she'd said, her nose wrinkling. "That's not a career." Kristen had laughed then too, saying I'd regret skipping a degree. But I didn't. I'd spent years learning, watching chefs, studying customers, perfecting systems. When I opened Coleman's Table, I poured everything into it, every late night, every burned dish, every lesson. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was proof I wasn't who they thought. Yet here I was, hiding it to keep the peace, letting them laugh. One of the bridesmaids, adjusting her earrings, turned to me. "Do you ever think about doing something bigger?" she asked, her voice soft but condescending. I forced a smile, shaking my head. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. Inside, I was screaming, "Bigger. I'm closing a $10 million deal next week." But I didn't say it. I couldn't. Not yet. Kristen was still the star, and I didn't want to steal her spotlight, even if she'd just thrown me under it. I glanced at her, laughing with her friends, oblivious to the hurt she'd caused. Did she even know how deep her words cut? Or did she just enjoy the power of putting me down? The makeup artist called me over, and I sat, letting her brush powder across my cheeks. My mind drifted to the early days of Coleman's Table. I'd started with one location, a small space with mismatched chairs. Customers loved it, the food, the vibe, the care I put into every detail. That success led to a second location, then a third. Now my name was on a contract that would take my chain nationwide, but my family. They'd never set foot in my restaurants. They'd never asked about my dreams, my wins, my struggles. They saw an apron and decided that was my story. Kristen's voice broke through my thoughts. "Hurry up, Bridget!" She snapped, adjusting her necklace. "We can't be late because of you." The bridesmaids giggled again, and I swallowed hard, nodding. I didn't want to ruin her day, no matter how much she'd hurt me. I stood smoothing my dress and joined the group as we headed to the ceremony. My heart was heavy, but I kept my head high, determined to get through this. I didn't know then that the day was about to change in ways no one expected. The ceremony began at noon with Kristen radiant in her lace gown. I stood as a bridesmaid, my hands clasped tightly, trying to focus on the vows. The guests' eyes were on my sister, but their whispers reached me. "Bridget's the one who never made it," one murmured, her voice low but clear. Another guest, an older woman in a navy suit, leaned to her neighbor. "Such a shame she's still in that dead-end kitchen job." My stomach twisted, but I kept my gaze forward, forcing a smile. I'd heard it all before, but standing there exposed in front of hundreds, it felt like a fresh wound. Kristen and her groom exchanged rings, their smiles perfect, practiced. As they stepped back, she took the microphone for her thank you speech. "I want to thank our families," she began, her voice warm. "My parents for their endless support, and the Walsh family for their incredible achievements." She listed names, praising Mom's charity work, Dad's business legacy, Virginia's academic prestige, Corey's tech empire. My name, not a mention. The omission was deliberate, a silent jab that hit harder than her words in the suite. The crowd applauded, oblivious to the slight, but I felt every clap like a slap. Kristen's eyes flicked to me, a smirk tugging at her lips as if she enjoyed leaving me out. My father, Gerald Coleman, stood near the front, his face stern. As Kristen spoke, he turned to me, his eyes heavy with disappointment. It was a look I knew too well, quiet, cutting, worse than any lecture. He'd always compared me to Kristen, the daughter who got it right. I shifted my weight, my heels pinching, trying to push down the ache in my chest. I wasn't the failure he thought, but his gaze made me feel like one. I wanted to tell him about Coleman's table, about the $10 million deal I was finalizing, but the words stayed locked inside. This wasn't the place, not with all these eyes on me. The photographer, a brisk man in a black vest, started organizing us for pictures. "Bridesmaids line up," he called, waving us forward. As we shuffled into place, he pointed at me. "You in the back," he said, his tone clipped. "Let the others stand out." My heart sank as the other bridesmaids took their spots, their dresses catching the light while I was pushed to the edge. I stood behind them, barely visible, my hands trembling. It wasn't just a photo, it was my place in this family, always on the sidelines, always less than. The guests watched, some whispering again, their words a blur of pity and judgment. "Poor Bridget," I caught one say, "never quite measured up." I forced myself to stay still, my jaw tight. Kristen posed with her groom, her laughter ringing out as the camera flashed. She didn't glance my way, not once. I thought back to our childhood when we'd been close, sharing secrets under the covers. But somewhere along the way, she'd decided I was beneath her. Maybe it was when I chose restaurants over college, or when I showed up to family dinners in jeans instead of dresses. Whatever it was, she'd built her identity on being better than me, and today, she was making sure everyone knew it. Gerald adjusted his tie, still watching me with that heavy stare. I wondered what he'd say if he knew I'd built a business from nothing, that my restaurants were the talk of Denver's dining scene. Would he still look at me like that? I doubted it. He'd never asked about my work, never visited Coleman's table, never cared to know. To him, I was the daughter who'd let him down, the one who didn't follow his path. The photographer snapped another shot, and I forced a smile, my cheeks aching. I didn't want to ruin this moment for Kristen, no matter how much it hurt. As the ceremony wrapped up, guests began moving toward the reception area. I lingered, adjusting my bouquet, trying to shake off the weight of their words and looks. I'd spent years proving myself building something real, something mine. But standing there, surrounded by people who saw me as a failure, I felt smaller than ever. I took a deep breath, reminding myself why I was here for Kristen, for family, even if they didn't deserve it. But the day wasn't over, and something told me it would take a turn I couldn't predict. The reception was in full swing by late afternoon in the hotel's grand ballroom. I sat alone at a corner table, swirling a glass of wine, trying to disappear into the crowd's chatter. The sting of Kristen's speech and Dad's disappointed stare still burned, but I was determined to get through this night. Then I overheard Mom Nancy talking to Virginia nearby. Bridget, as a godmother, Mom said, her voice low but sharp. "She's not exactly qualified, is she? Working in a kitchen hardly screams responsibility." Virginia nodded, her lips pursed. "It would be awkward for Kristen's child," she replied, her tone heavy with judgment. My grip tightened on the glass, my heart sinking. They were already planning Kristen's future family, and I wasn't even in the picture. Corey approached my table, his smirk as smug as ever. "Sitting here all alone, Bridget?" he asked, loud enough for nearby guests to turn. "No business partner or date to bring to the wedding. Kind of an embarrassment for the family, don't you think?" A few people chuckled, their eyes darting to me. My cheeks flushed, but I forced a shrug. "I'm fine on my own," I said, my voice flat. Inside, I was fuming. Being single wasn't a failure, it was a choice, one that let me focus on building Coleman's table. But to Corey, it was another way to put me down. I wanted to tell him about the $10 million deal waiting in my inbox, but I held back. "Not here, not now." A guest, an older man in a tailored suit, slid into the seat across from me. "So, Bridget, what do you do?" he asked, his smile polite but curious. The question hit like a punch. I opened my mouth, ready to mumble something vague, but the weight of the day, Mom's words. Corey's jab, Kristen's speech pressed down on me. "I work in restaurants," I said, my voice barely audible. His eyebrows raised and he tilted his head. Like waiting tables, he pressed his tone, implying it was a pity. I nodded, avoiding his gaze, my chest tight with frustration. I couldn't keep doing this, dodging their assumptions, swallowing their pity. I pushed my chair back, ready to slip out and escape the suffocating scrutiny. I stood, smoothing my dress, and took a step toward the exit. My mind was set. Get out. Get air. Get away from this room full of people who saw me as less. I was halfway to the door when a hand grabbed my arm, stopping me cold. "Bridget, wait," a voice said, urgent and familiar. It was one of Kristen's friends, her eyes wide with something I couldn't place. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. My heart raced, unsure what was coming, but her grip was firm, pulling me back into the moment I'd been trying to flee. I was about to slip out of the ballroom when Tara Gibson grabbed my arm. Her eyes were wide, her phone clutched tightly in her other hand. "Bridget, is this you?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. She turned the screen toward me, displaying a glowing review of Coleman's table. My restaurant chain complete with its logo, a simple, elegant table etched in gold. My heart skipped a beat. I nodded, unsure where this was going, but Tara's expression shifted from shock to excitement. "You're the owner of Coleman's table," she said louder now, drawing eyes from nearby tables. Heads turned, conversations stalled, and a hush fell over the room. Tara didn't wait for my answer. She stepped forward, her voice carrying across the ballroom. "Everyone, this is Bridget Coleman, the woman behind Coleman's table." The hottest restaurant chain in Denver gasps rippled through the crowd. Guests exchanged stunned glances, their wine glasses frozen mid-sip. Mom's face paled, her fork clattering against her plate. Virginia's jaw dropped, her pearls suddenly less impressive. Corey, who'd just mocked my car, stared like he'd seen a ghost. I felt every eye on me, the weight of their attention both heavy and electrifying. For the first time all day, I wasn't invisible. I took a deep breath, stepping into the center of the room. Yes, it's true, I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. I own Coleman's table. I built it from nothing, starting in a diner kitchen, learning every detail, cooking, managing, creating. It's not just a job, it's my life. The room stayed silent, every word sinking in. I could see Aunt Pamela shifting uncomfortably, her earlier comments about my temporary job now biting her back. Dad's stern expression softened, replaced by something I couldn't read: confusion, maybe regret. The guests leaned forward, hanging on my words, their pity replaced by curiosity. I kept going, my voice growing stronger. I worked nights, weekends, holidays, learning from chefs, waiters, even dishwashers. I saved every penny, took every risk to open my first restaurant. Then another and another. Now Coleman's Table is a name people know not just in Denver but beyond. I paused, letting the truth settle. A few guests nodded impressed while others whispered to each other, their tones no longer mocking. I felt a rush of pride, the kind I'd buried under years of their judgment. For once, I wasn't hiding who I was. Kristen stood up, her face flushed, her smile forced. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice loud but shaky. "Bridget just works in a kitchen. She's not some big-shot owner." She laughed, but it sounded hollow, desperate. The guests didn't join her. Instead, they turned to me, waiting for my response. Tara raised an eyebrow, holding up her phone again. "This says, otherwise," she said, scrolling to an article about Coleman's Table's latest award. "Bridget's the mastermind behind it all." The room buzzed with murmurs, and Kristen's laugh faltered. She looked around, realizing no one was buying her story. I met Kristen's gaze, my own steady and unflinching. "You never asked what I do." "Kristen," I said, my tone calm but firm. "None of you did. You assumed I was a failure because I didn't follow your path. But I built something real, something mine." Kristen opened her mouth, then closed it, her cheeks red. Mom looked down at her plate, avoiding my eyes. Virginia fidgeted, her earlier confidence gone. Corey leaned back, silent for once, his smirk wiped clean. The guests' whispers grew louder, some pulling out their phones, no doubt searching for Coleman's Table themselves. Tara stepped closer, her voice warm. "I ate at your downtown location last month," she said. "The food, the atmosphere, it was incredible. I had no idea it was you." Her words felt like a lifeline, pulling me out of the isolation I'd felt all day. I smiled, grateful for her honesty. "Thank you," I said, my voice softer now. The room was still watching, but the air had shifted. The pity was gone, replaced by respect, maybe even envy. I stood taller, feeling the weight of their assumptions lift, if only for a moment. But the night wasn't over, and another surprise was waiting. Before I could say more, Derek Sullivan walked into the ballroom. His suit sharp, his stride, confident, he scanned the room until his eyes locked on me. The crowd parted as he approached, his presence commanding attention. "Bridget," he said, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "I've been looking for you. We need to finalize the $10 million expansion deal for Coleman's Table tonight." Gasps echoed louder than before. Phones lit up as guests searched for confirmation, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Derek pulled out documents from his briefcase, holding them up. "This partnership will take your chain nationwide, new locations, new markets, everything we discussed." The room fell dead silent, every eye fixed on the papers that proved my success. I turned to my family, my voice rising with years of pent-up frustration. "You all assumed I was nothing because I didn't brag about it," I said, pointing at Kristen. "You called me a letdown, mocked my choices without ever asking what I'd built." Kristen's face crumpled, her earlier confidence shattered. I shifted to Mom. "You warned me not to ruin the day, but you ruined years of mine with your judgments." Mom's eyes welled up, but she said nothing. Aunt Pamela looked away, her hands twisting in her lap. Virginia and Corey exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier snide remarks hanging heavy. Dad sat rigid, his disappointment now turned inward. You never saw me. I continued, my tone firm. Not one of you. Kristen, you planned your life around being better than me. Mom, you compared us endlessly. All of you wrote me off. Well, I don't need your approval anymore. The words hung in the air, final and unbreakable. I faced the room. I'm done with this family. No more holidays, no more calls, no more pretending. My success is mine, and I won't share it with people who never believed in me. Kristen reached out, her voice cracking. Bridget, wait. But I shook my head. It's over. Derek nodded respectfully. The car's outside, he said. I grabbed my coat and walked out head high, the crowd watching in stunned silence. Outside, a sleek black sedan waited, not my old Honda, but a luxury ride arranged for the deal. I slid into the back seat, the door closing with a satisfying thud. As we pulled away from the Westin, I glanced back once. Kristen stood at the entrance, her wedding glow, faded tears streaming. Mom hugged her, but the damage was done. Weeks later, the fallout hit hard. Kristen had approached me months ago about partnering on a restaurant venture, dreaming of using my chain's name to boost her profile. With our ties severed, that opportunity vanished. She lost investors, her plans collapsed. Whispers spread through Denver's social circles, the Coleman's perfect image cracked, their judgment exposed. Guests from the wedding shared the story and invitations dried up. Mom's charity events saw fewer donors. Dad's business contacts grew wary. Virginia and Corey faced awkward questions at gatherings, their mockery backfiring. Aunt Pamela's comments became cautionary tales among friends. I drove to the business event that night, a gala for Denver entrepreneurs. Stepping out of the sedan, flashes from cameras greeted me. Reporters asked about the expansion. Partners shook my hand. I felt free, unburdened, proud of what I'd created without their shadow. Coleman's table thrived, the $10 million deal sealing my future. No more hiding, no more doubts. Looking back, the lesson was clear. Your worth isn't defined by those who refuse to see it. Self-respect matters more than validation from people who tear you down. Build your own table and let the right ones sit at it. To everyone who listened to the end, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your time means the world. What about you? Have you ever cut ties to protect your peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone.